Hi everyone, welcome back to the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. I'm GoLocal News editor Kate Nagel. I'd like to welcome my next guest, familiar face, GoLocal columnist Bob Whitcomb.
How are you?
Thanks for joining us. Before we tack to politics, which now seems like eons ago, I do want to talk about what's in the news and some discussions we've had today. Just spoke with Chad McGuire at UMass Dartmouth.
Terrific, great
I want to thank you for telling me to reach out to him.
Absolutely. I think what we're getting another reminder of here is the craziness of our coastal development rules or lack of rules, where we constantly pay through public and private money for people to rebuild where they shouldn't be rebuilding. And we're seeing this again, and we're seeing this in North Carolina. By the way, the federal flood insurance program was $20 billion in debt before Florence.
Oh, goodness.
So given the amount of development in that part of, you've been down there, but that part of North Carolina and Myrtle Beach and so on, it's going to be pretty bad. The storm did weaken, but the area is very broad. They're going to get, I don't know, 20 or 30 inches rain someplace, so there'll be tremendous inland destruction too, and people with their houses along the river.
So he mentioned the need for political, basically courage, if you will, that after a storm, because let's face it, it's, you know, people are watching, there's human suffering, there's a human toll.
There's a lot of drama. That's why cable television loves these storms.
There is, I mean, it's Hurricane Florence 24/7 right now, and for that part of the country, no two ways about it. You know, it is under siege. But, you know, will there come a time when politicians say, hey, you know what, I'm not going to give you money to rebuild here. We really need to think about this in a much more...
Very difficult, partly because of campaign contributors, partly because the nature of the people live along the coast. A lot of rich people, they give money to political campaigns. In the case of the Republicans, of course, most of these people tend to be Republicans. And you've got the real estate developers, you've got the real estate agents, huge economic force. And it's very difficult all over the country, not only in red states, but in New England too, to push back against that. I mean, people are building stuff in South County in Rhode Island they shouldn't be built. I think GoLocal has had some stuff on that, you know, building these McMansions basically on the dunes. And what will it take? Oh, probably a broader, you know, fiscal collapse.
Well, it's interesting because we were talking about the New York example.
And loss of life. I interrupt. The other thing is people rebuilding, and then they're in the house or wherever. The storm comes in, they drown, and then people start to ask, maybe really people shouldn't be there at all. Anyway.
Well, we were talking about New York, and Chad mentioned sort of the buyback program right after Sandy. Now they look like they're going to redevelop it again.
Along the Hudson.
Along the Hudson, but here in Cranston, you know, I don't know if this, I'm assuming it's the city's purview, not the state's, but they bought back a number of houses along
the Patuxent River,
that have continually flooded.
I remember it was in 2011, it looked like the Mississippi.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there was some foresight, at least in Cranston, to do so. So we'll continue to keep an eye on Florence. We're supposed to get some rain potentially next week as a small depression. It's heading inland, and it's not really coming up.
I don't see any embrace of reality anytime soon with this. Just the economic and the sort of the cultural factors encouraging people to be near water just continue very strong.
Well, I had to start with Florence because that's sort of top of the news cycle today. But of course, the primaries this week.
Right. Yeah, which does seem like 14 years ago. Yeah. A couple of things that struck me were kind of almost paradoxical. And I'm looking at the New York stuff too, where Como went very, for the big jobs, the big statewide jobs. The sort of establishment Democrats did perfectly well.
The
Truman, you know, the Truman Democrats, old-fashioned, kind of middle of the road Democrats, slightly left of center. But in the legislative races, this may be explained by the intensity of the progressives' passion in some of these races. The progressives did pretty well. I'm not sure about New York. I haven't seen all the numbers for the New York legislative races, but certainly Rhode Island, the progressives did well, which leads me to another speculation, which in the next session, Speaker Mattiello may well be out. It's just the fatigue, you know, speaker fatigue. And maybe some people blame him for the Paw Sox thing, but I really don't think so. I don't think there's nearly as much interest in the Paw Sox as
we've seen Moira Walsh has gone after him vociferously since turning back his candidate there.
But I think what you could see with the progressives taking up more space, more oxygen to the Democratic Party there, and then just this sort of speaker fatigue. I think I think we may well have a new House Speaker next year.
We shall see. And you raised the interesting point about the progressives at the local level versus the state. We had the story in Go Local the day following a progressive leader at the Providence Student Union. Really took folks to task to jumping on Matt Brown's campaign at the expense of, it was the infighting amongst the left. It was interesting to see. I mean, it comes down to there's finite resources, right? The Republicans are always talking about the voter turnout on the Republican primary, but when you talk about the progressive faction, there's only so many progressives, and granted, the party's
the
growing.
interesting thing, the people who vote in primaries, both the Republicans and the Democrats, tend to be more committed, but there is this sort of paradox. Again, you're all looking at the same ballots, basically, and yet they're voting for Gina Raimondo and not Matt Brown, who's positioning himself on the left. And I was a little surprised. I thought, given Gina's incumbency, and she's had some successes, I thought she'd probably win, but I thought he had a chance of doing an upset, of staging an upset. I thought he'd do better than he did, but I think some people saw they didn't trust him. They thought he sort of reappeared from the mist of history, and they thought maybe he was a little bit opportunistic.
Zach Mazzara with the Providence Student Union called him the random dude, and someone was like, "Well, he was I'll tell you this." When people said, "Oh, but he was Secretary of State in '06," think about the youth. Think about the youth of the progressives. They're like, "He wasn't our Secretary of State."
Paleolithic time.
I was in high school. I'm talking about the 20-somethings that say, "I don't remember him. He wasn't."
I remember nothing. I know nothing. But I was surprised because he was in many ways, he is a better candidate than Gina Raimondo in terms of public presentation. He's got some charisma. He speaks well. He's very articulate. I thought he would do better. That rather surprised me.
Were you surprised by the snafu out of the Raimondo campaign that they had some Providence imagery where they were taking...
that was great. I love that. Right. It was actually shots of downtown Reykjavik. That's right, where they identified the crumbling infrastructure of Cranston was actually in Providence.
I know it was right along the line there. A lot of folks, again, just point to that cooler, warmer snafu.
And they should push back strong. They should, what a silly screw up. That's what everybody should say. Oh, okay, I screwed up. Everybody makes mistakes going to the next thing, but with a cooler,
it's not the crime. It's not the crime. It's the cover up. I believe they're taking that piece out of the spot there. But let's just talk about the essence of the spot in itself. Cranston's oftentimes on those lists of best cities to live and best communities. So do you think Cranston's a distressed city?
Well, I think parts of it are gritty, obviously. I mean, it is an old city. It's got 90 or 100,000 people, and it used to be a manufacturing city. But mostly, I think it's pretty well kept up. I mean, it's in a sense, it's 2 or 3 cities. The area along the bay, and then the western Cranston, which is Exurbia, with McMansions and the area in between. But when you look overall, they have pretty good city services. The schools are pretty good, among the better ones in the state. And I think it's generally considered a pretty well-run place, has been under Democratic and Republican mayors. And I think the Mayor Fung has done a good job. I mean, he's not a visionary by any means, but he's done a competent job. The city seems to be doing pretty well. So I think the governor will have some trouble
with that argument. Speaking of mayors and speaking of elections, election night, WPRI 12 did erroneously call the winner of the Cumberland mayoral Democratic primary. Quickly issued a correction. I think the lead to when we had reported on this is there's multiple races on election day.
That's right.
It's not just candidates.
It's a mess.
It's the media, and the media wants to provide information
That's
first.
Right. The media is running for office too, in a sense.
The media race to call things.
Right.
I believe we were first to call Gina Raimondo, but you know,
were. So far as I know, and I looked around.
So is
And I haven't been paid to say that either.
No, he's not paid to say that. Back when Murphy York was originally dubbed the winner back in the day, does that just show sort of the crazy media world in which we're in?
It's much more of a jumble. I think around here, when you just had the Providence Journal, basically, sort of 1 or 2 TVs, Channel 10, but basically the Providence Journal did all this stuff. And they were affiliated with the National Election Service. It was all very orderly.
And they could call it when they called it.
They would call it, and of course, before the internet, so you're basically, before, say, 1990, they would rather carefully, and I worked there a couple of times, before, they would be very, very careful before calling anything. And if they didn't know it by press time, they would say they didn't know it, that they didn't have complete results.
Well, it's an
If it's too
interesting.
close to call, there might be a recount. Whatever.
History does repeat itself.
Yeah,
we did a report on this
absolutely.
here.
Yeah.
So what are we looking at moving forward for this
Well,
weekend?
yeah, obviously there's that. I talked. Well, we've already a federal flood insurance thing. I thought it was amusing. The president says he's trying to block federal employees from getting a pay raise of about 2%. The reason he's giving is because of the parlous state of the federal finances. This is after a huge tax cut.
Right.
So I thought that was sort of entertaining.
Well,
It goes from there. No, we can't possibly responsibly
take from Peter to
this.
pay Paul.
And then we've given the biggest tax cuts basically in history, or among the biggest ones in history. And I say something about, this is kind of a happy thing. You've probably seen this around. There's a bug, a fly, which kills the moths that kill the trees.
Okay.
And I think this is an upbeat thing.
Should this be the new state bug?
Yeah, right. It's some kind of fly. This is sort of biocentric stuff. Instead of using pesticides. So there's actually happy news.
Like that?
Yeah, that's happy news.
We like happy news.
Yeah, and something else. I think I don't have time this week to write about it, but of course the gas explosions up on the North Shore. Apparently the reason is the pipes are very old, they're corroding, and they're pumping a lot of gas through that, maybe too much, more than the corroded pipes can take. And I think this is an example of our, crumbling infrastructure.
Aging infrastructure. Wow, that was
aging infrastructure.
Unbelievable up there. And it's to say, I mean, it could happen anywhere.
Yeah.
It's a very scary thought.
Well, I think maybe a little bit more so in old parts of the country.
Well, here, meaning New England, could have.
I mean, I don't know when those pipes were installed, and the governor, everybody else in Boston is trying to find out what happened. But
so maybe this week or maybe next week you'll learn about that?
Yeah, probably next week. Can I put in? I also put in a pitch for a book about seabirds by Adam Nicholson, which is about the eerie beauty of 10 species of seabirds and how many of them are under stress, endangered.
Well, always appreciate when you get the environmental and literary aspects in there as
very
well.
New England.
It is very New England.
Very New England.
Bob Whitcomb's very New England.
Well,
Thank you, as always, for coming, and Bob, we'll let you on your way down to southern more pastures,
right.
And we'll be right back here.
Tropical Newport.
We'll be back with our next guest in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center.